Hey everyone, it's Carissa Wiley at sprinkledwithglitter.com. Thanks for joining me today. Today I am sharing this card featuring the new Daisy Wreath layered stencil set and coordinating die from Pinkfresh Studio. And I wanted to give you some tips and tricks for using these layering stencils. Now here's a look at the set I'll be using. As I mentioned, it is called the Daisy Wreath layering stencil. And this is another set of their layering stencils that I had on hand as well. I wanted to show you that all of these stencils are labeled. So stencil 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then there are marks around the corner that show you where your A2 size card front will line up with the stencil. Now you can cut your cardstock to the A2 size and line it up with those marks. Or if you're going to be die cutting it, you can cut it to the size of the stencil and line up the corners, which is what I did. So I cut my cardstock to 5 inches by 6¼ inches, and I'm actually using my Misty stamping tool to keep the corners and the edges of this aligned. So I just have my magnet placed there. Now, if you don't have a Misty stamping tool, that's no big deal. You can tape this in place or hold it in place with something like pixie spray. And if you'll notice here, I kind of moved my stencil when I moved that magnet around because it was in my way for blending. And so I just went ahead and picked this up, made sure my edges were aligned once again, and then placed it back into the lower corner of my Misty and replaced my magnet. So when you're using these layering stencils, you're going to want to make sure that you're lining everything up the same way. So if you're using the A2 size card, you're going to line it up using those little marks at the corners. And if you're using the cardstock that's the same size as the actual stencil, then you'll just want to make sure that those bottom corners and edges are kind of lined up every time you start a new stencil. Now, I know a lot of people have difficulty with ink blending, but I want to really encourage you to give layering stencils a try, even if you feel like you have difficulty with ink blending, because this is very different than blending an entire panel with ink. Because the areas are so small, you don't tend to get those big blobs of ink like you would if you're trying to blend an entire panel. And you have that very slick surface of the stencil for your blending tool to glide over. Now you'll notice that I am using blending brushes today, but you could use whatever blending tool that you have the most success with. There's a lot of them on the market, and I encourage you to use what you're comfortable with. Now, once I have the first stencil blended, I am going to go ahead and place my second stencil, lining it up with the corners of my Misty. And this is the beginning of the florals on this stencil. So I'm using the Coral Reef ink for these larger daisies. And there's some smaller flowers around the perimeter. I'm actually going to ink blend those in a different color because I wanted to bring in a little bit of that Christmassy vibe without having this be a Christmas card. It is Christmas season right now when I'm creating, and so this color palette has really been speaking to me this season. The green that I used for the base of my leaves is Olive from Pinkfresh Studio. And this red that I'm using here is Candy Apple. And I'm using that on these smaller kind of buds that are around the edge of this wreath. Now, I was really impressed when Pinkfresh first released these at how easy they are to line up. Because you can really see through the stencil, it's not the same as a layering stamp set, but yet it gives you all those different variations in colors and layers and really creates a scene that's very beautiful. So now I have the detail layer of the florals here, and I'm using passion fruit and gathered twigs. It's a brown color for the accents on those red flowers, and I really thought once again that kind of brought in the Christmas vibe. Now the center of the florals, that was very easy. I used I used peach fuzz, and then I blended over it with warm buff to kind of warm it up and keep it from being too bright. And then this is the actual outer wreath portion and the detail layer on the leaf. Now you can blend these all in the same color, But I decided to blend the base of the wreath in the gathered twigs, that really nice brown color, and the details of the leaf in the evergreen color from Pinkfresh Studio. And I went back to the layer for the base of the flower, and I actually added just a tiny bit of passion fruit to those large pink daisies on the outside. So you can see I am left with this really beautiful floral image, and there's a coordinating die available, so you can die cut this out, and it creates just a really beautiful piece for your card, and it's so easy to do. Every time I use these, I think, I don't know how this is going to turn out. And every time I use them, I am so pleased with the results. Now keep in mind, because these are stencils, you can use some of those layers to blend in like some Versamark ink and add some embossing powder to that layer. Or you could use some mists or sprays over certain layers to add a little bit of sparkly detail. And if you missed my video with the layered sunburst stencil set from Pinkfresh Studio that was also released as a part of their December release, you'll want to go back and watch that because it turned out so beautifully. So I've die cut my image using the coordinating die, and now I am taking the inside portion of that wreath, and I'm going to use the Diamond Plaid stencil set from Pinkfresh Studio to add a little bit of pattern to the center of this wreath. So I'm just kind of holding that stencil in place using a little bit of purple tape, and I am blending over it using the Misty Coast ink. And then I added the next layer of the stencil, and I went over that again with the Misty Coast ink. And that left me with this really subtle, beautiful gray plaid to kind of have in the center of the stencil. Now, if you wanted to, you could leave that blank, but I just thought this was a cool way to add a little bit of pattern to this without having it be too overwhelming on the card itself. So I went ahead and placed that center portion back into the wreath, and I'm going to hold all of these pieces down onto my card front. So this is cut to 4 inches by 5¼ inches, and I've held all of these pieces onto the card front using a little bit of purple tape, and I'm prepping the surface of that wreath using my powder tool, and I'm inking up this sentiment. This sentiment is from an older Pinkfresh Studio stamp set that I absolutely love. It's called the Scripted Bold Sentiments one, and the sentiment says, "Thank you." So I've stamped that in Versamark ink onto the center of my wreath, and it kind of overlaps onto the base of the card as well. So I'm stamping all of these pieces at once. I added my gold embossing powder, and now I'm heat setting that. And this, I left this part in here because does embossing ever get old? I mean, it is so magical. Every time I watch it, it is kind of just mesmerizing. And I even watched it on someone's Instagram the other day, and I was just like, it's pure magic. So once I have that heat set, I'm going to actually go ahead and replace this into my Misty and stamp a second time so I can get a really thick, beautiful coat of this gold embossing powder for my sentiment. So I'm placing that exactly where it was in my Misty before, inking it up with the Versamark ink. I prepped it with the powder tool once again. And then I am going to pour my gold embossing powder over that embossed area and heat set this once again. And that is really going to build up that gold embossing powder, and it just looks so beautiful and dimensional and shiny. Now, before I adhere this onto my card front, I'm actually going to do just a tiny bit of ink blending onto the card base. And I'm using the Pinkfresh Studio Mint ink and a blending brush to just kind of make a little halo. It's very even, it's so subtle in the video. It's a little more apparent in real life, but it just kind of gives a little bit of something extra and keeps the card front from feeling too flat. And once I have that blended on, I will add foam adhesive to the back of my wreath and the wreath center and place that onto my card front. For my card base, I am using some craft cardstock. It's cut to 4¼ by 11 inches, and I've scored it at 5½ inches, folded it in half, and really reinforced that fold line with my bone folder. And that creates a top folding A2 size card. And then I will place my card front onto my card base using some foam adhesive to give it a little bit of dimension. Now I finished this card off with just a few clear crystals from the Pinkfresh Studio Essential Crystals set. I think this is a great way to add a subtle touch of shine to your card. They almost look like clear droplets, but keep in mind they are a little bit dimensional. So if you're mailing this, you may want to mail it in a padded envelope or something like that, or hand deliver it. As always, that works well. As always, I will have links to the featured products used in this project in the description at YouTube. So if you're looking for something in particular, be sure you check there. Or you can head on over to my blog at sprinkledwithglitter.com. I will have that linked below as well. Over there, you'll find more still shots, more information, and a complete list of supplies. As always, thanks so much for stopping by and watching today. I hope you enjoyed this project. If you did, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications here on my YouTube channel so you won't miss any of my paper crafting and card making video tutorials that I share here. And I would really love it if you would share this video with a friend. Once again, thanks so much for watching. I'm so glad you're here. And until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the very end. You know, if you've made it this far, you are one of my favorites. If you want to subscribe to my channel, go ahead and click that button on the left side of the screen. And here's a couple more videos I thought you might enjoy.